Hello, and thank you for inviting me to present some thoughts and recent activities on developing the next generation of observing networks and modeling for coastal solutions to the threat of climate. I'm Emanuele Di Lorenzo, a professor and director of the program in Ocean Science and Engineering at the Georgia Institute of Technology, and I'm also chairman and co-founder of Ocean Visions, an initiative and nonprofit that brings together a consortium of U.S. research universities that aim at transforming and accelerating the deployment of science and engineering into practical, scalable, and equitable ocean solutions in collaboration with partners from the impact and acceleration world, which are listed on the slide. In the last U.S. National Climate Assessment Report that was released in 2018, the socio-ecological impact of climate for coastal systems was highlighted in Chapter 8. And with the release of the latest IPCC report and several other studies, it is clear that we have to move beyond mitigation and start developing comprehensive and nationally integrated coastal solution strategies for both adaptation and resilience. This, I'm sure, comes with no surprise in such audience, but coastal communities are facing an increased frequency and severity of hazards related to flooding, heat waves, acidification, hypoxia, and other threats linked to climate change and also the growing human populations on the coast. For the purpose of today's talk, I'm going to focus on the type of observations and modeling approaches required to enable long-term coastal solutions to flooding, which is an ongoing climate crisis affecting the east and Gulf coasts of the United States. Typical drivers of coastal flooding are high tides, offshore wind events, storm surges linked to hurricanes, rising of groundwaters, and also extreme rainfall, as we have recently witnessed in New York with the intense precipitation of Hurricane Ida. Now, from a physical science perspective, the issue we struggle with is measuring and understanding the compounded nature of these drivers, meaning they often co-occur. However, there are many other dimensions to observing the coastal cities and communities. These include, for example, engineering dimensions and the understanding of how city infrastructure will be impacted, and how to design better engineering defenses and ultimately better city planning and development. Now, there's also an ecological dimension that focuses on nature-based features and their ability and potential to lessen the magnitude and extent of flooding, and perhaps most importantly, the social and human dimension. In fact, we greatly struggle to understand and predict how human will respond and possibly act to adapt and become more resilient to coastal climate change. Now, at a very fundamental level, most coastal communities and cities lack a vision for their future. The absence of developing a new vision for the coast leads to what I call what is defined as a default vision, that is preserving the status quo, and headed towards cities that are essentially protected by walls and similar engineering structures. However, there are other options for the future of coastal cities, including the development of consolidated or elevated or floating cities or hybrid approaches, as shown in this slide, and pointed out by a recent science paper by Mack and Siders that was also followed by a collection in a special issue in Journal of the Environmental Science Studies. Now, the establishment of appropriate data stream that can inform the understanding, prediction, and planning processes of these multiple dimensions of coastal solutions on the climate timescale is therefore critical. When it comes to sea level and coastal cities, this planning has been severely impeded by the lack of adequate observing system. Now, focusing on the physical dimension, to date, coastal observation have predominantly focused from the coastal ocean, off to the continental shelf. And as we know, for example, we can show this nice map here of the NOAA tide gauges. We see that most tide gauges are along the East Coast are essentially very sporadically dispersed. Now, if we zoom to a coastal city like Savannah, Georgia, which is one of the largest port hubs in the US, and also my own state, we see that most of the populated areas are located across the ocean-land boundary and nested within complex wetland and river channels. Now, traditional coastal observing system, as we have seen in the Integrated Ocean Observing System Regional Association, have not provided to date the information needed for coastal city and emergency management agencies to plan resilience and adaptation at the scale where people live. For this reason, in 2018, a group of Georgia Tech scientists and engineers met with the City of Savannah Mayor and the Chatham County Emergency Agency, which is the surrounding county of the City of Savannah, to co-design a new low-cost water level sensor network that could provide real-time information of sea level from the coast across the wetlands and inside the city around critical infrastructure such as bridges, roads, power substation, hospital, and pipelines. Now, we refer to this project as a Georgia Smart Sea Level Sensor project. Over the course of 3 years, the Smart Sea Level Sensor teams has installed over 50 water level sensors, which are ultrasonic and also, as I said, low cost, and are connected through a series of wireless hubs using the LoRaWAN communication protocol, which is a low-frequency, high-range wireless signal that is typically used for the Internet of Things applications. Now, this observing systems was co-designed from day one with the local stakeholders and has led to the co-development of decision support tools and community engagement and also awareness effort in the city of Savannah and Chatham County. The first set of tools are a public data portal, which you can find at the dashboard.sealevelsensors.org, and the Chatham County Emergency Management System web portal, which provides real-time access to the sensor data and has a specific interface to monitor critical infrastructures such as bridges and escape routes. Another set of tools and approaches that are aimed at community engagement, and here is an example of the so-called map room, where citizens come together to understand and co-design solution strategies on a digital projection map that shows different flooding scenarios. Of course, the sensors only provide point-wise data. To provide a more comprehensive coverage of water level across the territory and in between sensors, we have also developed a modeling system. Now, the coastal ocean model that we use is called SHIFM, and it is a three-dimensional ocean and river circulation model that covers the entire North Georgia coast. Using an unstructured grid, the resolution of the model extends from 7 kilometers on the shelf all the way to 10 meters along key river channels. And this essentially allows us to have at least 10 to 20 computational grid points. For example, in the Savannah River, just off the downtown area of the city of Savannah. Now, this model is currently used operational to deliver 3-day forecasts that are available also in a public portal and are being integrated in the SEMA web portal, which is essentially the emergency management portal. Here are some comparisons of the model predictions during the passage of Hurricane Dorian, which luckily arrived at low tide and generated minimal impact on the Georgia coast. Now, the comparison is overall good and is providing additional data to better model the interaction between the coastal ocean, the rivers, and the marshes. While the coastal model provides water levels along the major waterways, it is important to also capture the local hydrology and the urban flooding dynamics. For this purpose, the coastal model is being coupled offline with the land, surface, groundwater model, and a 2D surface flow using the WRF Hydro. The SHIFM and WRF Hydro models allow to downscale and resolve regionally the compounding effects of flood drivers, for example, precipitation, storm surges, and tides, and use them as the boundary conditions for an urban flooding model that includes stormwater system and drainage network, groundwater infiltration, and a high-resolution 2D water flow that can account for city-scale human and green infrastructure. Now, this is accomplished with a model like the PCS-WMM. The ultimate goal is to convert the flooding data and scenarios into metrics of impact that allow to measure the multi-sector cost of flooding for the ecological and social dimension. These metrics can then be used to define a multi-dimensional cost function that can be used to evaluate the benefits of different planning and city-scale adaptation strategy. This is the foundation of an optimization data modeling framework for coastal climate resilience and adaptation. Now, in this framework, the controls such as nature-based solution, urban development, engineered structure, are the things that we can change to affect desired outcomes for a community, like, for example, human and ecosystem health, equity and environmental justice, and so forth. So in essence, we have here an iterative loop as shown in this figure. Now, it is very clear that any observing system designed for climate solution will need to be sustained and integrate data stream that measure and possibly model the multiple dimension of coastal systems. In recent years, there has been a significant progress in the US, and there's a growing number of examples where researchers and local stakeholders are co-designing data and modeling products to assist community with addressing the rising coastal hazards linked to flooding and sea level rise. Yet, there is a significant fragmentation and repetition of efforts that arises from a lack of integration and sharing of data, knowledge, and processes across coastal communities. In an effort to reduce this fragmentation and develop an integrated community, in the summer of 2020, Ocean Visions began a series of coastal solution workshops around the US to better understand the landscape of ongoing projects where these researchers and stakeholders were co-designing and deploying observing networks and modeling systems for coastal climate solutions. Now, we had 3 Ocean Vision workshops focused on case studies along the US East, West, and Gulf Coast, followed by the NOAA Coastal Coupling Modeling Community of Practice workshop. And here, I want to take a moment to thank the several partners that came together to organize this effort, including Sea Grants, the IUS Regional Association, the USGS, and other university partners listed in this slide. So far, we have collected over 50 case studies on how these data and modeling products are evolving to meet a range of coastal stakeholder needs for coastal climate solutions. All these case studies and the associated survey data were available on the Ocean Vision website hosted by the Coastal Solution Task Force, along with the recording of a synthesis session that was held at the last Ocean Vision Summit in May 2021. Now, during this synthesis work, it became clear that many shared challenges and opportunity exist for coastal solutions. This has motivated the development of a draft document for establishing a national pilot program that aims at supporting and bringing together 20 to 30 coastal communities across the US to co-design and deploy a shared roadmap for implementing equitable coastal solutions to climate, together with expert networks of scientists, engineers, practitioners, and innovators. This pilot was discussed in a joint panel with NOAA administrator, mayors, scientists, and insurance company representatives at the Ocean Vision Summit. Some of the near-term goals highlighted in the pilot are: 1. To clearly articulate the coastal solution challenges that are shared at the national scales and those that are specific at the local regional scale. 2. Co-design shared solution roadmaps where tools, resources, and processes are integrated within the human infrastructure in a structured flow for planning coastal solutions to climate. And here, the human infrastructure represented by a network of coastal stakeholders, scientists, engineers, practitioners, and industry is really important glue that brings the tools and data into the proper context for an effective advance in planning solutions. Number 3, leverage the roadmaps to engage and mobilize investment capitals and federal funds to activate coastal communities and their supporting expert networks. Now, engaging the investment of private capital will fast forward the progress, but of course it also requires a different way of conducting our work. Now, there are many key building blocks of this pilot listed below and include, for example, on-demand access to networks of practitioner and expert, community science and the need to build expert capacity in the end user, the development of community scale visions for how the coastal communities of the future will look like, new funding mechanisms, and optimization frameworks. But today, I want to report some early success in the development of the new generation of observing system for coastal communities. Following the recommendation from the workshop, the Socorro Regional Association for the Integrated Coastal Observing System has announced in June 2021 the development of the Southeast Coastal Water Level Initiative. Now, here is a map of the NOAA tide gauges. The new Socorro Water Level Initiative will establish a high-density, low-cost sea level sensing network that will cover the ocean-land boundary along the entire U.S. southeast coast. This sensor network will provide real-time information at the scale where people live, with a focus also on underserved community, like in the example showing the Pinpoint community in Georgia, which is frequently impacted by flooding. Sustaining these observation networks in the long term will allow us to fully understand the climate signals along the coast and enable adequate planning for adaptation. Of course, this is only the beginning of a truly multidimensional observing system that will also necessarily include the social and ecological dimensions. And with this, I want to thank you for your time.